We have some breaking news out of the Supreme Court. They have gone ahead and let the Trump administration continue on with firing more than 1,000 Department of Education workers. So this came out today. It's a significant victory, as this article from the New York Times says, for the administration, and could ease President Trump's efforts to sharply curtail the federal government's role in the nation's schools. So there was about 1,300 workers that were fired, but then there was an injunction put in place by a DC circuit judge, I believe. Let me see really quick. It was here. I saw it earlier. Okay, so Trump had signed an executive order directing Linda McMahon, who used to be the former CEO of WWE.
Linda McMahon.
You've got a beer bag.
Yeah, classy woman. And I forgot to say, thank you.
She is now the education secretary. He signed an executive order pretty much telling her to go ahead and shut down the department. But shortly after, as this article points out, 2 school districts, the American Federation of Teachers and 21 Democratic state attorneys general, filed a legal challenge in a federal court in Massachusetts. On May 22nd, a judge went ahead and issued an injunction saying that they had to reinstate the fired employees while the lawsuit was pending. However, as we know from last week, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled that no judge can issue a nationwide injunction. So this ruling from the Supreme Court pretty much says that the firing of those employees can stand while the case works its way up through the legal system. And this is an issue that I have with the U.S. Supreme Court. When it comes to things that are federally mandated by Congress, things that directly tie into the balance of power, why does the Supreme Court have to wait for a case to make its way all the way up? Because by the time it makes it to the Supreme Court, the destruction has already taken place. They should just immediately issue rulings on things that directly have to deal with this, not wait for an appeal and work its way up. That's just a flaw with the legal system that I have. And when I talked to my friend about it, he was like, yeah, that is kind of crazy. Why don't they just step in, like with the whole birthright citizenship case? Why don't they just step in and issue a ruling and directly and quickly on the spot check the president's power with that, right? With the 3 co-equal branches of government. But they don't. So this is where we are. So these employees are now let go again while this court case makes its way up. And like I said just a second ago, by the time it reaches there, the department will probably already be gone. There are some quotes here that the Trump administration issued out. The White House praised the decision, the Supreme Court, saying, quote, "The Supreme Court once again recognized what radical district court judges refused to accept. President Trump, as head of the executive branch, has absolute constitutional authority to direct and manage its agencies and officers," a spokeswoman, Liz Houston, said in a statement. But then in a statement, a union representing the education department workers called the court's decision, quote, "deeply disappointing." Further on saying, "This effort from the Trump administration to dismantle the Department of Education is playing with the futures of millions of Americans, and after just 4 months, the consequences are already evident across our education system," Sharia Smith, the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 252, said in a statement. So this is a huge thing. I don't think people understand that the Federal Department of Education does more than I think what they think it does. So for instance, when you see a school having accessibility, right, wheelchair ramps, elevators, making sure that kids have an equal baseline to have the best learning outcomes as their peers as possible, that is in place because of the Federal Department of Education. Like I said, for example, if a child uses a wheelchair and their class is on the 3rd floor and they need an elevator ride up to the 3rd floor to make it to their math class, they now have an equitable chance to have the best learning outcome, the same as a student who was able to walk the 3 flights of stairs. You know what I mean? Like that's just a simple analogy there. The federal department makes sure that all the schools have the funding to be able to do something like that for students. However, Republicans who are so good at branding and marketing have turned this into a whole thing of, the Department of Education is too woke. They're pushing this radical agenda. They are trying to teach DEI and CRT and all of this stuff. That's what it's turned into. And people ran with that. People actually believe that. Book bannings, etc., what have you. We are seeing this culture war happen in the school system. And who is going to be the direct Who's going to face direct consequences of all of this? It's the students. The students are not going to be able to have the best learning outcomes as possible so that they can have the brightest future for themselves. So if you remember, Trump signed this executive order in the midst of students. It was completely devastating. The fact that they think that dismantling the federal Department of Education is actually going to help children in this country. Furthermore, I want to talk about the kind of ranking of school systems because I think this is important to know. So I saw this on World Population Review that these are the top states for education in America. And if you look at that list, Massachusetts down to New Hampshire, with the exception of a couple, what do you notice? Most of those states are blue states. It's blue states that tend to have the best public education system for students in this country. And red states like Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma have the worst outcomes for students learning wise. That's just what it is. Like, they don't have the funding. And when you look at the federal Department of Education, when you look at any federal department, any federal department agency, they're funded by tax dollars, right? So when you have a big state like New York, California, these big Democratic blue states who are paying so much more in to federal dollars than a place like Arkansas, Louisiana, or, Kansas or Nebraska is. But then it's these states that are being subsidized by the tax dollars. It's the red states being subsidized by the tax dollars of blue states because they just can't afford it, right? So for instance, let's just say a disaster like hurricanes that hit Florida, hurricanes that hit the Gulf of Mexico, pretty much those states that kind of border the Gulf of Mexico. Maine doesn't have that, but Maine is a blue state and they pay federal tax dollars to go to FEMA to be able to assist those people. You know what I'm saying? So like, there are things that the country needs that all these other states are subsidizing, but then they're being gutted because of these Republicans in these red states that think these issues are that important. You know what I mean? So like, is gutting the entire federal Department of Education and risking the literacy and educational outcomes of all the kids in this country worth owning the libs? That's the issue that I have here. And we even saw in Oklahoma how that superintendent was auditioning to be the education secretary, trying to get the Trump-endorsed Bible in all the schools, trying to get the 10 Commandments up in all the schools. I'm a Christian, but I understand that that's also a slippery slope, because what happens if someone who is not that, gets up there and puts like a bunch of other things like that are not good? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a slippery slope. So should be that separation. Let me know what you guys think about this. Our education system in this country is already failing. We are already getting left behind by all these other countries. But if you look at this, like Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Washington, Pennsylvania, swing state, Vermont, Minnesota, Connecticut, Virginia, swing state, Wisconsin, swing state-ish. You know what I'm saying? Wyoming, red state, Maryland, blue state, Maine, blue state, Nebraska, red state, Rhode Island, blue, New Hampshire, blue. Like, you start to see how red states that vote for these are the ones that are going to be impacted the most. And I think that is extremely important to point out. I think Republican states are the ones that are going to suffer the most from this. When you have rural America where there is one public high school for 10 surrounding counties, or vice versa, if schools start closing all these counties, like, okay, well, all of you in this 15 county radius, you're going to go online, or you guys are all going to go to this one school. It doesn't help anyone. Education is one of those things that should not be gambled with. It's something that should just be there for the betterment of the nature in the future, right? We want to have bright scholars out of this country. We want to have future scientists that have breakthrough discoveries. We want to have these amazing scientific discoveries coming out of this country, and we can't do that if we keep thinking that education is not something to invest in. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. It seems like we are speed running toward authoritarianism, and the Supreme Court and the Congress is just giving more and more of their power up to the presidency. And the next time, I bet you, when there's a Democratic president that starts doing all of this stuff, going off these rulings that the Supreme Court is handing the Trump administration, the Republicans are going to be there to criticize it. The Supreme Court is probably going to reverse their decisions because it's a Democratic president. But like I said in the last video, nobody catch amnesia when election season rolls around. Remember all of this when you go to the polls the next time.